The night was still, and the neighborhood slept in quiet darkness as an elderly couple sat on their small wooden porch, enjoying the last warmth of the day. They had lived in that house for more than 40 years, building memories, planting dreams, and growing older together with the kind of peace that only two hearts truly in love can understand. They were not wealthy, not powerful, not dangerous. They were simply kind people who spent their evenings watching the streetlights glow and waiting for the next phone call from their only son, who lived far away. They believed he worked in logistics management because that is what he always told them. They never knew that their son had lived a life made of shadows, blood, and missions that never reached the light of day. But on that night, fate walked toward their door, wearing the face of cruelty. A mafia group had been trying to take over the neighborhood, buying houses, forcing people to leave, scaring anyone who dared to resist. Most people gave up, but the elderly couple refused. This had been their home for decades, and they would not abandon it, even if threatened. The mafia saw it as an insult and sent a group of men to handle what they called unfinished business. They thought it would be simple, fast, and forgotten. The men arrived in a black vehicle, stepped out silently, and surrounded the porch. The old man stepped forward, trying to reason with them, but reasoning was not something they understood. The woman held her husband's hand and whispered that everything would be fine, but the fear in her eyes said something else. The mafia men did not waste time, and in a few moments that peaceful porch became the site of a tragedy that would soon echo far beyond the neighborhood. They left the couple lifeless on the ground and drove away, unaware of the storm they had just awakened. The next morning, their son, Jacob, received a call from a neighbor who was crying so hard he could barely understand the words. When he finally did, he felt the world collapse inside him. He sat down, unable to breathe, unable to think for a moment. Jacob had seen death before. He had faced enemies, trained killers, bombs, and chaos. He had lost teammates, brothers, and even parts of himself in the deserts where he once served. But nothing could compare to losing the two people who had loved him beyond measure. He took the first flight home, his hands clenched in silence, his eyes burning with a rage deeper than any mission he had ever been sent on. Jacob had been a Delta Force commander, one of the most elite warriors the country had ever produced. He had disappeared from official records years ago, becoming a ghost by choice to keep his parents safe. He believed that by keeping distance, he was protecting them. But now, the ghosts of his past pushed him forward. When he arrived in the neighborhood, people stood in small groups, whispering. They had seen the news and knew who was responsible. But none of them knew who Jacob really was. They saw only a grieving son, not the storm inside him. He entered the house and sat on the porch where their rocking chairs were still placed side by side. The wood smelled like memories. He touched the armrest and felt the last warmth of their presence. The silence weighed heavily, but in it, he heard something else. The echo of training, the call of instinct, and the promise he silently made to himself. The mafia would not walk away from this. They would not hide behind fear or money. He would find them one by one and make them understand what it meant to awaken a warrior who had nothing left to lose. Jacob began by gathering information, walking through the neighborhood, speaking to witnesses, studying the scene with the sharpness of a man trained to read the smallest detail. The mafia operated from an old warehouse on the edge of the city. He approached it at night, moving like a shadow, blending into darkness. Inside, he heard laughter, voices, celebrating, unaware that death had already entered their walls. He stepped inside, and every man who saw him underestimated him. They saw only a civilian, a grieving son, but they did not see the soldier behind the eyes, the commander hidden beneath years of silence. His strikes were precise, controlled, and merciless. He moved with the speed and certainty of someone who had survived too many battles to fear another. One of the men recognized him too late. He whispered the name like a curse as he realized who had come for them. The Mafia's leader had once heard stories of a Delta Force commander who vanished without a trace, a man whose skills were so lethal that even enemies spoke of him with a mix of fear and respect. They never imagined he was the son of the couple they had killed. Jacob questioned the survivors, forcing the truth from trembling lips. He learned who ordered the attack and where the boss hid. He left the warehouse behind him, silent and burning, not with fire, but with the weight of the justice delivered inside. He found the Mafia leader in a mansion guarded by armed men, but armed men meant nothing to someone who had walked through war zones where survival depended on every breath. Jacob infiltrated the mansion with the calmness of a man on a mission crafted by destiny. He disarmed opponents before they could even raise their weapons. He moved with purpose until he reached the room where the leader waited, trembling behind his desk, pretending to be powerful. Jacob stood in front of him, and the leader finally understood that some lines, once crossed, cannot be undone. The leader tried to explain, tried to offer money, promises, deals, anything that might save his life. But Jacob saw only the faces of his parents, the gentle smiles, the warmth of home, the kindness that had been stolen from the world. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply walked closer and ended the story the way it had begun, in silence. When it was over, Jacob stood outside the mansion, breathing in the cold night air. He knew nothing would bring his parents back, but he also knew that no one would ever harm anyone in that neighborhood again. He returned to their house, sat on the porch, and looked at the empty rocking chairs. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a son. And in that broken silence, he knew their love would guide him through whatever life remained.